Welcome to episode 66 of No Rares Required, a weekly podcast where I cover the top performing commons and uncommons in a color pair or archetype that you vote on each week here on YouTube. And this week, Izzet or Blue Red won the vote. And the theme on MTG Arena is Artifact Sacrifice, which I think is pretty accurate. In this set, it is very important to develop the board and not to block and to go first. But without on the job, the board pump in white, the strategy is a little bit different than Boros. But you can still take advantage of overwhelming your opponent, and the go wide strategies have been very successful, at least in the early first 2 weeks of murders at Karlov Manor. And so you can't, you're not looking to do a big board pump with the 2/2/1, but you can use cards like Offender at Large, which undisguise into a 5/4 and then give a creature +2/+0 to give something that's unblocked additional damage getting through. And the gold or multicolored uncommons are very good in this archetype. And so cards like the Gleaming Geardrake, Detective Satchel, and Maverick Thopterist are all very high picks. As far as removal goals, you've got Galvanize, which works nicely with cards like Projector Inspector, or popping a clue token to draw your second card to deal 5 damage. And Shock is also great, since it can remove a warded disguised creature and not fall behind in mana. In comparison to Boros, which I think is going to be overdrafted here shortly if it's not already at that state, I think Izzet is looking quite promising for the upcoming weeks. I think it's just going to get better as we figure out how to kind of fine-tune the archetype. So my tips here would be to try to be majority red, since if you are going to play Dog Walker, which is a very top-performing common, you can only flip for double red in this archetype, and the good 2-drops are in red. So with that, let's cover the cards individually and when I think you should look to take them during a draft. First, I like to calculate the total wins created, and I do this by taking the average of the games played win rate and the game in hand win rate on 17 lands. Then I subtract the average win rate of all users in the archetype and multiply by the numbers of games played. And here, so we can kind of see what are the top performing, most commonly played cards. Top of the list, we've got Gleaming Geardrake, Detective Satchel, followed by the removal of Galvanize, Shock, Torch the Witness, Gadget Technician, Reckless Detective, Cryptic Coat, Ill-Timed Explosion, Deuce, Lamplight Phoenix, Out Cold, Person of Interest, Exit Specialist, Reasonable Doubt, and Krenko, Baron of 10th Street. So if you don't know what these cards are, don't worry, we'll be going over them more closely here shortly. And then the total wins destroyed is the opposite. What are the cards that are most commonly being played that are negatively affecting the archetype? And we have top of the list here, we have Reenact the Crime, which is you remove something that went into the graveyard, a non-land that went into the graveyard, and you can copy it for 1 in triple blue. I think it's a rare. Atrata, Deadly Fugitive, which is the Dimir rare. Hedge Maze, which I think is the blue-green land suffixing. Conspiracy Unraveler, which is you can collect evidence 10 instead of paying for the casting cost. And so this is just another big mono blue rare. Makeshift Binding, which is the enchantment removal in white. Rakdos, Patron of Chaos, which is the Rakdos black-red bomb. Ezram, Agency Thief, which is the 5/5, can give itself sacrifice an artifact for 1 colorless to give it artifact or to give it hexproof or lifelink or vigilance. So that's the Azorius bomb. Commercial District is another land fixing. Mystery Key is a blue artifact. Meddling Youths is the 4/5 haste that if you attack with 3 or more, you get to investigate in Boros. Wojak Investigator is the 2/4 for 2 and a white for flying that creates on upkeep can give you a clue token. Helen Inquisitive Prodigy is the Simic rare. Magnifying Glass and Thinking Cap are the cards that if you have them in your deck, you can play the Investigator or whatever, the flyer at uncommon in blue. And so those 2 cards have not been performing very well, and I think they're in the list because of that card. Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, is the blue planeswalker on the list. And then we have Smuggler's Copter, which is a colorless artifact, similar to kind of the Schooner. It allows you to filter, and so that one's not been performing very well. So overall, looking at just the total wins destroyed is, again, we can see that this archetype is not particularly good at splashing. A lot of the really powerful bombs like Ezram and Rakdos, Ellen, you know, Etrata, they have not been performing well. So try to stay focused into color in this archetype, and avoid some of the kind of worse artifact synergies, as well as some of the big blue bombs or traps. So after that, I like to look at the take the total wins created and divide them by the number of times that the card was picked, and graph it against the average taken at, and fit the data with a logarithmic regression. And what this allows me to do is calculate the distance that the card's win rate is to the fitted line, which, thanks to Karl, aka 2duck cubed, we'll call value over replacement, or VORP. And this allows me to see what are the top cards to take at different time points within a draft. So top of the list here, we've got Cryptic Coat. You get a 3/2 unblockable for 3 that then you can, if it dies, you can do 1 in a blue to return the Cryptic Coat to your hand and play it again. And the top card of your library gets cloaked, so you can hit some interesting synergies. The Bubble Smuggler is not a particularly good common, but it works really well with Cloak, because when it flips up, it becomes a 6/5. And if you cloak it, it only costs 1 in a blue to do that, instead of its disguise cost of 5 or 6. So remember that if you have a disguised creature that is cloaked, you can do the cloak cost instead of the disguise cost. Lamplight Phoenix is a top performing red rare. Been doing really well in every archetype. Nothing special about it here in Izzet. But you, as long as you have the 4 evidence in your graveyard when it dies, you can immediately collect evidence 4 and bring it back to the battlefield tapped. So you don't have to pay anything to make this a recurring threat. If you do play this out on turn 3, which I've done a fair amount, and you don't have the collect evidence, they can snipe it early. So that's something to keep in mind, is you might want to wait until you have the evidence in your graveyard, so that this is much more difficult for your opponent to remove. Intrude on the Mind has been particularly fun to play. I just played almost trophied with it last night. I ended up getting bombed on by Ezram a little bit too much. But Intrude on the Mind allows you to separate 2 piles, and you get to choose what are in the piles. And so you could do, typically you do a pile of 2 and a pile of 3, and you can kind of treat the flyer as the 3rd card. So if you make a pile of 2, and they pick that pile of 2, then you get a 3/3 flyer. If they pick the pile of 3, then you get to draw 3 cards, but then you get to create a 2/2 flyer. That's your most common, is you're going to do a pile of 3 and a pile of 2. But if you're in a state where your opponent can't afford to give you like a 5/5 or a 4/4 flyer, what you can do is you can put all the cards in one pile, and then it's either they give you a draw 5 for 5, or they give you a 5/5 flyer. And so that can be particularly powerful. The other thing, too, is remember that this is instant speed, so you can create that flyer at instant speed and block one of their flyers. I've been very impressed with this mythic. We've got Steamcore Scholar, which is the Wind Drake with Flying and Vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards and then discard a card. You can be running a relatively heavy spell list. There's no real like spell slinger archetype in the meta, or in this set. So, but if you have something like a Deduce or something like that, you can discard it instead of discarding 2. So this has been a very impressive way to filter through, especially early on. And then a 2/2 Flying Vigilance Windrake has worked particularly well in the air. There's not a whole lot of outside of like the Wojak Investigator. There's not a lot of cards that are just going to immediately shut this card down. And then we've got Krenko, Baron of 10 Street, and this one is impressive, especially when you have more artifact fodder like clue tokens to be able to sacrifice. And whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard, which you can trigger yourself by sacrificing it, you can pay 1 red to create a 1/1 Goblin creature token, and then it gains haste, and you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Incinerator of the Guilty is a bomb in red. Sometimes the set is fast enough that you don't actually get to really do much with this. I've had it 2 times already in my like 14, 15 drafts that I've done. And Incinerator of the Guilty, most of the times, your opponent either just like scoops when you play it, because every time that it connects, it does a one-sided wrath. It does a one-sided board sweep, as long as you can feed it with the collect evidence. So this is just an absolute bomb in red. And then we've got the Fugitive Codebreaker, which is a 2/1 Prowess Haste with Disguise, which is nice. So you can either play this out as just an early threat that you can pump with combat tricks, Or you can disguise it, and then when you undisguise it, you can discard your hand and draw 3 cards. So if you're playing a really low curve and you're just trying to flood the board and get as many things on, onto the field as possible, you can then undisguise this to refuel your hand. Impressive. And then the Pyrotechnic Performer is another one that works particularly well with the Offender at Large. So when the Offender at Large flips, you can give it itself the +2/+0, and then that deals 7 damage directly to their face, not to mention the Offender at Large that's coming right at them. So this one goes up in value the more disguise cards that you're playing. This is not specifically the disguise archetype, but I've felt like disguise is rather ubiquitous throughout the format. And this is the real chunk of why I do this is the value over replacement for picks 2.5 through 5. So after you've kind of seen your bombs, these are the cards that are the most likely to direct you into what archetype that you're going to try to be. And so top of the list here, we've got the Gleaming Geardrake. And this has been an amazing card, especially in this archetype where you have enough artifacts to really fuel this into just an absolute beast. You get a 1/1 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you get a clue token. So that's pretty good already. And then whenever you sacrifice an artifact, like popping that clue token, you put a +1/+1 counter on Gleaming Geardrake. And this just keeps growing. And even if you get this to like a 3/3 or a 4/4, it can be very difficult for your opponent to deal with. Ill-Timed Explosion is the Wrath and Izzet, and is definitely worth a mention. For 4, you get to draw 2 cards, then you may discard 2 cards, and when you do, Ill-Timed Explosion deals X damage to each creature, where X is the greatest mana amount value among cards discarded this way. So you can choose and select what kind of Wrath you want to do. If you have a whole bunch of creatures that are going to survive at, only dealing 3 damage, then you deal 3 damage to the board. So it's kind of customizable Wrath. A lot of your stuff, though, is tiny. A lot of it is like 1/1 tokens from the Dogwalkers, 1/1 Thopters from your blue-red signposts that we'll get into here shortly. And so it doesn't work as perfectly as maybe you would like think it would, but a 4-cost Wrath is still a 4-cost Wrath. Torch the Witness has been amazing removal. The fact that if you deal excess damage to it, it also gives you card draw on future turns with the clue token, which also gives you additional synergies with like Satchel and the Gleaming Geardrake. Torch the Witness is fantastic. And the fact that you can, change it so that, you pay 2, it deals 2 damage. You pay 3, it deals 4 damage. You pay 4, it deals 6 damage. You want to make it so that it deals the extra damage, though, because the clue token is really what puts it over the top. Reckless Detective has been very impressive. You get a 0/3 that whenever it attacks, you may sacrifice an artifact or discard a card. So if you have like a clue token, you can just sacrifice that. And then if you do, you draw a card, so you don't have to pay for your clue tokens, and they give you the same effect. And then, but it also helps you filter through your hand. So early on, if you've got too much land, you can filter out and discard those lands. If you don't have enough, you can discard some of your more expensive cards to find those early land drops so that you don't stumble. And then as a 2/3, you attack really nicely into your opponent's disguised creatures. Then we've got the Kylox Volt Strider, which is a 4/4 vehicle with Collect Evidence 6. Volt Strider becomes an artifact creature until end of turn, so you can turn it on basically without crewing it if you want to. The Collect Evidence 6 is kind of expensive, but whenever it attacks, you may cast an instant or sorcery spell from among cards exiled with it. And if that spell would be put into a graveyard, put it on the bottom of its owner's library instead. So you get to, this can trigger 2 exile effects from your graveyard, which keep in mind if you are doing some sort of synergy like that, like the Chalk Outline, this would trigger twice. But yeah, you get to replay your spells from your graveyard, which can be like deduces that give you additional card draw, and has been particularly impressive in this archetype. Galvanize, you've got deal 3 damage for 1 and a red, which is pretty good. And then if you've drawn 2 or more cards this turn, it deals 5 damage to that creature instead. Like I mentioned at the beginning, Projector Inspector and your clue tokens, there's lots of ways to trigger the draw 2 in a turn. A lot of times this is just a 2-mana deal 5, which is really great, especially after your opponent has flipped their disguised creature. So, because otherwise you have to pay for the ward, and then that's a little bit like you're going down in value, paying 4 to eliminate their ward creature. Still okay, you're not really losing that much, but if they spend, 5 mana to flip it after playing the disguise for a total of 8, and you remove it for 2, you get way ahead in value. We've got props, eidetic memory. I might be saying that wrong. Photographic memory. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. You have no maximum hand size. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've drawn more than one card this turn, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is the number of cards that you've drawn this turn -1. So this one, just the fact that like it cycles is good enough, really, right? Like 1 in a blue to draw a card, and you have no maximum hand size. I don't think the maximum hand size is really going to matter too much in limited, more so for constructed. But you can have a lot of card draw, especially with deduce. And if you have that card draw with your projector inspectors, being able to create +1/+1 counters off of the cards that you are drawing is fantastic. Shock is good. I think I mentioned this one during Boros, and I had the privilege of having 4 shocks early on in the format. The fact that this can go face is nice, and then if you do target a warded disguised creature, you are paying 3 mana to remove their 3-drop, so you do not fall behind even if you have to pay the ward or shock. And so I don't know why people were not really high up on this, but I hope you are, and take your shocks for sure. And then we've got Exit Specialist, which is particularly nice as a disguised creature. You can play it out as a 2/1 in a pinch, but there are a fair amount of 2/1s for 2 in the set. The Informant that hasn't done particularly well. So you're really looking to want to disguise this and then flip it. When you undisguise it, you get to return target creature to its owner's hand. So you can do this to trigger ETBs on your creatures if you wanted to. You can like bring it back to your hand at end of their turn and then play the creature again to get another ETB. But most of the time, I've just been bouncing my opponent's stuff, and it helps you with the pressure of going wide. And then speaking of payoffs, we don't have the +2/+1 for everything, but Fuss and Bother works pretty well, especially because it's easier to cast the Bother side, which spawning 3/1/1 Thopter artifact creature tokens and surveilling 2 is not bad. But giving everything permanently +1/+1 for each attacking creature you control really is one of the best ways to take advantage of going wide. The rare lands in general are good in the focused 2-color archetypes, less so for splashing. But being able to fix your lands just so that you can ensure that you have, 9 sources of blue, 9 sources of red is definitely a good way to do it. And then we've got a Case of the Burning Masks, which I've been very impressed with. You get removal, so you deal 3 damage to a creature, and then as long as 3 sources have dealt combat or dealt damage this turn, including itself, so 2 other creatures or a shock or whatever, it's pretty easy to solve this case. And then you can exile it, so you can sacrifice the case to exile the top 3 cards of your library, and you may play that card this turn. So Case of the Burning Masks has been it's kind of like a reckless impulse inside of an incinerate or something, right? It's 2 cards in 1 is a lot of value, and I've been very impressed. Dogwalker is better in Boros because it's a lot easier to flip, but it's still a card that I'm looking to take in Izzet. You just remember you do have to have the double pip red to be able to flip this, and you can't play it out. You're not going to be splashing white to play it out as a 3/1. So this is it's definitely a little bit worse in this archetype than it is in Boros, but it's still a very impressive card. And the fact that it's 3 rectangles in 1 allows you to really pressure your opponent and go wide. And then last, we've got Lost in the Maze, and this one is pretty good. It's not amazing, but it's definitely one that like if you open it up and it's the rare that one of the rares that you have in the pack, you get an enchantment for X double pip blue, and when Lost in the Maze enters the battlefield, tap X target creatures. Put a stun counter on each of those creatures you don't control. So this works pretty well. There's the Out Cold in blue that's 3 in a blue, and you don't have to pay ward. But the nice thing about this is that like if it's later in the game, you can tap a lot more than just 2. And then you can also use it defensively because tapped creatures you control have hexproof. And that ability is permanent. So all future attacking creatures you control have hexproof, and that's nice. And then here we've got the value of a replacement, and this one is really what like I look at this a lot to determine how well the archetype is performing as far as like is it being overdrafted or underdrafted. And the larger this list is, as well as picks 8 and onward, the healthier the archetype is. And this is why I was saying that in the upcoming weeks, I think that the Izzet archetype is going to be doing particularly well. because you have a ton of cards here. I mean, I almost couldn't fit it on the screen. So it's doing well. Izzet is not overdrafted. Top of the list here, we've got the Maverick Thopterist, which Improvise allows you to pay it for cheaper by having each archetype or artifact that you have tap instead of paying for its mana cost. So if you have 3 artifacts in play, you can play this for a blue and a red. And when it enters the battlefield, you get to create 2 1/1 Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying, which really helps you, similar to Dogwalker, right? Like if you can play this out specifically for blue-red and you get 3 cards out of it, it feels very similar. And then, but even cheaper than Dogwalker. You don't have to pay for the disguise cost. Detective Satchel, 2, a blue and a red to get yourself an artifact that creates 2 clue tokens. And then at any time that you're sacrificing a clue token, you get to tap it to create a 1/1 artifact creature token with flying. And so you can do this at instant speed. And this also just helps you go wide in the air. Hard Evidence has been particularly good. This one is one of the list cards. You get to create an early blocker with the 0/3 blue crab creature token, and then you get a clue token, which works very well in this archetype and synergizes nicely. Gadget Technician has been very impressive at common. I'm always looking to pick these up once I know that I'm in Izzet. And sometimes when I'm not in Izzet, it's actually one of those that like I look to splash too. So when it enters the battlefield, or is turned face up, which is nice. I like the ones that are not just when they get turned face up. So you don't have to go through the disguise route. You can just play this out for 4. But you get a 3/2, and then it creates a 1/1 Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Scene of the Crime is also worth mentioning because this archetype, above all of the others, really focuses on the artifact synergies, and being able to play a land that then later in the game turns into a clue token helps additional synergies with your artifacts. Cornered Crook is one that's definitely worth a mention in Izzet specifically. I'm not 100% sold on this in other archetypes, but in Izzet, I definitely think it's above filler. You get a 5/4 for 5, and when it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice an artifact. When you do, Cornered Crook deals 3 damage to any target. So you can remove a problematic blocker or problematic attacker, or you can just hit them for 3 damage directly to the face. Projector Inspector is a 3/2. This one is I've really liked this card. I was a little bit down on it because I hate the 3/2 stat block, but it has been performing particularly well, and it works great in multiples. So if you have 2 Projector Inspectors in play, when you play the second one, they trigger off of each other, and then your future detectives are all drawing 2, and you get this like amazing filtering, and you can go find exactly what you need from your deck and smooth out your draws. And then like cards like Person of Interest, this triggers the Projector Inspector even though it's not a detective, because it spawns a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. And similar to Boros, this one just like, it's bad on defense, it's great on offense, right? If you're playing this defensively, it is a 2/2, because the only thing that can block is the 2/2 that it spawns, the detective creature token, because it has Suspect. But on offense, they need 3 cards to be able to block this, right? You're getting in for some damage. You're applying a lot of pressure on your opponent. And then similarly to Boros, you want to be offensive. You don't want to be blocking in this format, or at least in the red and blue and red and white archetypes. And Red Herring has worked. I've liked it. It's the Valley Dasher from Khans of Tarkir. You get a 2/2 that has to attack every single turn. But if it is going to get blocked and just not just die into a 3/3, you can tap 2 to sacrifice it and draw a card, and that works better in this archetype than it does in Boros. Crime Stopper Sprite is worth a mention. You get a 2/2 Windrake, so a 2/2 flyer for 2 and a blue. When you cast it, you can tap something, and then if you collect evidence 6 from your graveyard, then you can tap something and put a stun counter on it. And so just tempo-wise, this is a very nice card, and a 2/2 flyer has been applying decent pressure in this set. Case of the Filched Falcon is one that I've come up a little bit on, specifically in Izzet, just because it's similar to the Hard Evidence. You can just play this out as a 1 blue that gives you a clue token, and I think that this archetype is looking to have clue tokens enough that that's worth doing. And then later, if you need to, you can make it into a 4/4. You have to pay 2 and a blue and have solved the case, which shouldn't be a problem in this archetype, but then you get a 4/4 flyer. And so, it's decent. It's not something that like I would really wait to do the other things first before I made the 4/4 flyer, because those clue tokens are really important in other parts of your deck, but still worth playing. The Cold Case Cracker I've been really impressed with too. A 3/3 flyer pushes nicely, blocks the Windrakes from your opponent, and then when it dies, creating the clue token has been relevant. And then we've got Escape Tunnel, which even without splashing, I think you should be looking to run 1 or 2 Escape Tunnels in your deck. The fact that they can sacrifice to give creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn works really well with something like Offender at Large. So what you do is you make it so that your 2/2 disguised creature can't be blocked, and then after you go past their blockers, you make it into you undisguise it and hit them for 7. So being able to sacrifice your land later in the game to deal 7 unblockable damage works particularly well. And then you've got Granite Witness, which is another just like disguised creature that this one, like Dog Walker, you're going to have to pay double blue for this one. So pay attention to your mana base and how difficult this is going to be. But being able to flip up a 3/2 Vigilance flyer that then taps one of your opponent's creatures works particularly well. And you can use it as a combat trick too, right? You can flip it and untap something that they weren't expecting to block. If you do have like a large Criminologist or something like that. Criminologist is the 4/5 for 5 that you can sacrifice a clue when it comes into the battlefield or attacks. That's another one that like I was tempted to put on the list here, but like it's just not quite good enough to match the criteria. And then last but not least, I was saying that you really shouldn't look to splash. There is one exception to that rule, and that's Coerce to Kill. Coerce to Kill is one of those cards that, like, if you are in black or if you are in blue, you should be splashing this card. Coerce to Kill is amazing. It is a automatic 2-for-1. So when you play it, you get to take out their biggest threat, and then you have a 1/1 Death Toucher that's going to trade with something on their board. So keep your eyes out for the Coerce to Kill. I still have seen them, especially because Dimir has not been performing very well. I've seen these late, so you can still pick them up. I think as the time goes on, though, the secret's going to be out on how good this card is, and you're not going to be able to see them as often. But that's the one that I look for. That's the one that I support splashing for. As far as picks 8 through and onward, there are still a lot of options in this, and that's why I was saying like this is looking like a good archetype for the upcoming weeks, because there are a lot of options that you can still pick up on the wheel. Compare this to Boros, which is basically whittled down to nothing, like 2 or 3 cards in pick 5 and onward. You can see what I mean. But the Deduce is a draw card, investigate for 1 and a blue. And this deck likes to be drawing cards. It triggers off of your, triggers your draw 2, as well as giving you a clue token for additional synergies. Reasonable Doubt I've enjoyed playing. So you get a 1 and a blue to counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. Because you don't have a whole lot of really great spot interaction, this is particularly nice to try to block their ward creature, because you don't have to pay their ward if you're countering it. So the other thing too that's nice is that you get to suspect up to 1 target creature. So this is a little bit play versus draw dependent, but I was playing against an opponent where I got to eliminate their ward creature while giving my 1-drop or my 2-drop, giving it suspect, so that it was able to get in for additional damage and really apply the pressure, like put the suspect on the red herring, right? And then out cold, you've got 3 and a blue, and I've liked this one in blue. So you get to tap 2 target creatures and put a stun counter on each of them. And the nice thing is you can do this to warded creatures because you don't have to pay it. I've seen people screwing this up. If the card says this spell can't be countered, don't pay the ward cost. It is crazy, especially with black removal. I've seen so many people messing this up. But yeah, removing 2 of their threats for 2 turns really allows you to take advantage of going wide and pressuring your opponent's defenses. And then we've got Offender at Large, which honestly is like my secret weapon, at least for the first 2 weeks. People were just not wanting to play this card, and it deals a lot of damage. When it flips up, it often trades, or if not, just the rule of 5. If they block this and you flip it up, you can eliminate one of their things as well as get in the additional damage. And like I said at the very beginning, it works really nicely with the Pyrotechnic guy that allows you to just hit them for 7 directly to the face. So I'm always looking to grab these Offender at Large if I know that I'm in a red archetype, at least for the time being. And then we've got Unauthorized Exit, which is a instant return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, Surveil 1. So this one allows you to just remove a blocker. There are some bad ETBs in the set, so this can be a little bit matchup dependent. You don't really want to be doing this if they're playing like a Steam Core Scholar and going to get like 2 additional draw off of it. But it's pretty good for bouncing things for 2 if it, after they've disguised their creature and spent 8 mana in total to do their thing, being able to just use this for 2 to get it back into their hand can be just devastating to some of the disguise strategies. And then we've got Sanitation Automaton, or Automaton, which is a 2/1. I've liked this card as filler just to make sure that you have enough 2-drops. The 2/1s for 2 are okay, right? It's not the end of the world if you're playing 2/1s for 2. There are a couple of disguise creatures that flip up into stuff that would block this and not trade, which is the downside. But you get a Surveil, which is really nice for that tempo and making sure that do you need to find land 3? You can Surveil, if it's not a land, put it in your graveyard and try to find that 3rd land, right? So like, especially early on, this is particularly good. You don't want a whole bunch of them though, because they're not great later in the game. Turn 5 and onward, top decking the Sanitation Automaton is not like going to be that great, but it does let you Surveil to maybe find your bigger bombs. So. And then you have artifact synergies in this archetype specifically that I think puts Sanitation Automaton above filler where I usually put it. And then last but not least here, we've got the Chase is on. And because of the way that Ward has been working on your Gray Ogres, your disguise cards, the Chase is on has worked particularly nice. Combat tricks in general across the board have done really well because you have so many Ward 2 creatures. And so being able to give something +3/+0, and if it's an unblocked 1/1 flyer, you just get in for 3 damage for 3, and then you get an Investigate. And similar to the Auspicious Arrival in white, the combat tricks that give you an Investigate are over the top, because you play all of these combat tricks, and then if your opponent is still alive, you redraw your hand by popping a bunch of clue tokens to then have more threats to try to seal out the game. And in this set, in this archetype, sacrificing those clue tokens can give you additional synergies. So next week, I'll be covering an archetype that you vote here on YouTube. So remember to cast your vote. If you're competing in the qualifier this last weekend, I hope it went well. Let me know in the comments below. I always like to hear how you guys did. And if you can always also join my Discord. The link is in the comments or in the video description. And let me know there. That's always a fun time too. So every Friday, I publish a best of 3 sideboard guide. Every Saturday, a 50-match summary in best of 1 standard. And every Sunday, I do a standard meta review. And so if limited's not your jam and you made it through this entire video, I'm not exactly sure why. but I try to do multiple days a week of some Magic the Gathering content for you guys. So this one every Tuesday is a draft guide for the current set. So remember to click like and subscribe for near daily Magic the Gathering content. And thanks for listening and being a part of my community. Good luck with your games and future trophies. Thank you all for the support, and I'll see you next week.